The banquet hall was decorated with pink bows and silver balloons that hung from the ceiling like a mistaken cloud. I arrived 10 minutes earlier than most because that is how I am always on time, always organized, always the one who arrives first and leaves when they have already washed the last glass. I stopped in the hallway that leads to the restrooms because I heard voices behind a half-open door, the storage room where they keep the extra chairs. I recognized my younger sister's voice from the first syllable. She was saying that everything was turning out well, that nobody had noticed anything, that as long as I kept not checking my things carefully, the business could keep running for at least another year. Her husband laughed with that sound that always rubs me the wrong way, that sound he makes when he thinks he won something. He said that the only thing they needed was for me not to start asking questions. I stood still in that hallway with the Sweet 16 gift in my hands, wrapped in bright champagne-colored paper with a bow that had taken me 20 minutes to tie that morning. The noise of the party reached me from the hall, the trendy song that all the 16-year-olds ask for this year. The kids running, the ice clinking in the glasses, and me there without moving, listening to how my sister and her husband talked about me as if I were a resource they were managing. But before telling you what I did next, I need to explain how I ended up in that hallway. And before we go on, if you are already subscribed to the channel, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from, because these stories travel far, and I like knowing where they land. My name is Mary Sullivan. I am 38 years old, I am a CPA, and for the last 9 years, I have run my own tax accounting firm in Chicago. I wasn't born here. I grew up in Osgood, Indiana, a town most folks can't find on a map unless they live a county over. My dad spent 40 years working the fields and sweating in a brickyard. My hands don't look like his because I grabbed books where he grabbed tools. But what I learned from him is exactly the same, that the things worth having are built slowly, with a straight back. We are 4 kids. I'm the second, but from a very young age, I was the fixer. The one who balanced the ledger for the little front porch store my mom ran. The one who helped my older brother fill out applications. The one who explained the new Medicaid laws to my dad. Nobody asked me to do it. I did it because I knew how. And because in a house where money was always tight, knowing how to do things holds more value than money itself. I left for Chicago at 18 on a partial scholarship to study accounting at the University of Illinois. I covered the rest by tutoring middle schoolers in math on weekends and running annual tax returns for vendors down at the Maxwell Street Market who didn't know how to file. I slept 6 hours a night, sometimes 5, and I felt like the luckiest person breathing. Because, for the first time in my life, my opportunities depended on me, not on the weather or the price of bricks. I got my degree, joined a corporate firm, soaked up everything I could for 4 years, and at 29, I opened my own doors. I started with just 2 clients, a college friend sent my way, typing on a laptop that still had my university stickers on it. In 3 years, I had 12 steady clients. In 5, 26. Now, at year 9, the firm has 4 employees. I lease an office in the West Loop, rent paid on the dot every month, and I hold a client roster I built visit by visit, return by return, audit by audit. From the moment I started making real money, I started sending money back to Osgood. Not because they asked for it. Well, they did ask, but I was already sending it before the question ever left their mouths. It was my way of saying I hadn't forgotten them. That just because I had moved forward didn't mean they had to stay behind. I paid for my dad's cataract surgery when the state insurance was going to make him wait 8 months. $4,000. $200 we didn't have time to wait for because he couldn't see well enough to drive into town anymore, and it was breaking his spirit. I fixed my mom's kitchen when part of the roof caved in during a season of heavy storms. $11,000, counting materials and labor. My older brother wrecked his motorcycle and lost 3 months of work. I sent him a monthly check for those 3 months so his family wouldn't go hungry. And then there was my younger sister, Sophie. Sophie is 34 and was always the social butterfly of the four of us. The one who charms a room, the one who flashes a smile I never had, the one who talks people into things without them ever realizing they are being sold. She married Rick at 26. Rick sells insurance and talks about business like he is perpetually one handshake away from the deal of a lifetime. The one that changes everything. The one that just needs a little push to get off the ground. I gave him the first push. Rick wanted to open a janitorial supply distribution company to sell to local schools and county hospitals. He asked me for $18,000. He swore he would pay me back with interest in a year. I gave it to him without a single signed paper. Mostly because Sophie looked at me with those eyes she gets when she needs something, and because my mom was sitting at that very same table saying that family doesn't need paperwork, that paperwork means you don't trust blood. The distribution company lasted a year and 3 months. Rick claimed the market was too saturated, that the hospitals took too long to pay invoices, that vendor regulations had changed. $18,000 vanished without a trace, and nobody ever uttered the word repayment. Then came the second push. Sophie wanted to open a hair salon in Osgood. She needed $10,000 for the lease and the chairs. Rick was going to handle the books. The salon opened. It limped along for about 2 years and finally shut down when the landlord gave the space to another tenant because they hadn't paid rent in months. $10,000. Gone. After that, there was some catalog clothing business I never fully understood. $7,000. In total, over 6 years, I handed Sophie and Rick $35,000. No contract, no promissory note, not a single signature. Every time I pulled out the calculator app on my phone to run the numbers, Sophie would get defensive. She'd tell me I was always too materialistic, that money wasn't everything, that family helps out without keeping a tally. Rick would laugh and say that with my strict accountant mindset, I was never going to enjoy life. And I would put the phone away. I cared more about peace than being right. And because I thought, that is just what a good sister does. I also need to admit what I never told anyone until much later, that a part of me always knew things were wrong. That tightness in my chest every time my sister called with an emergency wasn't my imagination. But I had been taught from a very young age that setting boundaries in a tight-knit family is called selfishness. I carried that lesson for a long time before I realized it was a lie. Everything changed on a Thursday in March at 6:30 in the evening. I was locking up the office when I got a text from Chloe, a fellow CPA I see at board meetings every couple of months. Her message said something that didn't make sense the first time I read it, so I read it again. Then a third time. Chloe said she had been running a check through the IRS portal for a client's paperwork, and she accidentally stumbled onto something that made 0 sense. My EIN, my employer identification number, the one I've used for 9 years, was linked to 2 active business entities. Mine, Sullivan Accounting Services, which actually exists and which I file for every year, and another one I had never heard of, Midwest Commercial Distributors. Registered business address in Osgood, Indiana, declared active for the last 2 years. And it had a pending tax liability that Chloe couldn't fully view because it required password access. I texted her back asking if she was absolutely sure. She sent a screenshot. I sat back down in my desk chair, still wearing my winter coat. My computer monitor was still glowing with the client's bank statement. The office was dead quiet. My staff had already gone home. Outside, I could hear the late afternoon traffic and the bus that rolls down my street every 15 minutes. I logged into the IRS portal with my credentials. I searched my own number. I saw exactly what Chloe saw. Midwest Commercial Distributors, LLC, registered 26 months ago. My name listed as the primary legal representative of the company. I had never signed a single paper for that. I didn't sleep that night. I drove back to my apartment, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my brain spinning at a speed that drowned out the radio, even though I turned it on 3 different times. I sat at my dining room table with my laptop and hunted for 4 straight hours. I found out the company was registered with the state paying payroll taxes for 3 employees. I found out its registered address was on Elm Street in Osgood, which is the exact same street where my parents live. I found an accumulated tax debt of $11,200 in unfiled returns. A company in my name, a debt in my name, 3 employees the government thought I was legally obligated to pay. Everything tied to my tax ID, my social security number, my home address, all of it existing without my knowledge. At 2 in the morning, I called the only person I could think of. Not my mom, not Sophie. I called Patricia Hayes. She is a corporate and tax attorney I met at a CPA seminar 3 years ago. A 52-year-old woman who speaks slowly, never uses more words than necessary, and only asks a question when she already knows the answer, and just wants to see if you know it too. She picked up on the 4th ring. I apologized for the hour. She told me not to worry, that it sounded urgent. I told her everything I had found. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she asked me 4 questions. Did I ever sign articles of incorporation for any business? No. Did I ever give anyone my complete tax information for any kind of filing? No, not that I knew of, but it was highly likely someone in my family had copies of my documents from times I helped them with paperwork. Did I know who could be behind the registered address? Yes. Did I want to stop and think about it before taking action? No. She stayed completely quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Mary, what you are describing is corporate identity theft and the fraudulent formation of a business entity. Depending on what we dig up, we might also be looking at wire fraud and the illicit use of legal documents. I need you in my office first thing tomorrow morning with everything you have. Do not speak to anyone in your family. Anyone. Is that clear?" I told her yes. I wired her retainer fee before my head hit the pillow. I was in her office at 8 the next morning. Patricia already had coffee pouring and a legal pad open to page 1. In 2 hours, we mapped out what we had and what we needed. She filed a formal request with the IRS for the complete file on the company acting as my legal counsel for a directly affected party. We also lodged a complaint with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network for the misuse of financial data, and we pulled the complete state workforce history of the employees registered under that business. She told me I needed patience, that these processes don't resolve in days. I didn't have patience, but I learned how to fake it. The results started coming in during the 2nd week. The IRS handed over the complete file for Midwest Commercial Distributors. The articles of incorporation showed me as the majority owner with 80% of the shares. The person who processed the registration, the person who physically walked the paperwork into the county clerk's office, the person who signed the intake forms on behalf of the company was Sophie, my little sister. The business address matched my parents' house in Osgood perfectly. The corporate bank account was in Rick's name, listed as the managing director. The company had spent 2 years selling construction materials to small municipal projects. According to the ledgers Patricia pulled, they had invoiced around $90,000 in that time. $45,000 billed under my tax ID through a company I didn't know existed. Carrying a tax debt, the IRS now had every legal right to collect from me. Patricia laid it out with the brutal clarity of someone who knows her words are going to draw blood, but knows that not saying them would be fatal. They didn't just use your identity to run a hustle, Mary. They built something with layers. If the IRS had gotten here before you did, they would have served you as the jointly liable party for that debt. If anyone sued the company, you were the majority owner. If the business went bankrupt owing suppliers, your name was the one on the chopping block. You were the meat shield. They were the ones cashing the checks. I asked her about the other layers. She took a moment before answering. The following week, we found another one. Rick had taken out a small business loan from a private commercial lender, using the company as collateral and using me as the personal guarantor. The loan was for $45,000. He had been drawing on it for 8 months. He was 4 payments behind. The lender was gearing up to start the collections process, a process that, naturally, was going to be mailed straight to the registered business address. My parents' house. My parents didn't know anything about this. Or at least, that is what I still desperately wanted to believe. Patricia flipped her legal pad to a fresh page and wrote down the names in a column. Sophie, Rick, my dad as the owner of the property they used, though there was no record of him actually authorizing it, which we still needed to verify. I asked her what she thought about my dad's involvement. She said she didn't know yet. Sometimes people let you use their address without realizing they are also lending you their legal liability. It doesn't absolve them, but it's entirely different from willful participation. I just stared at the names on the yellow paper. My 34-year-old sister. My brother-in-law who always had the next big deal that was going to change the world. And the very real possibility that the house I grew up in had served as the headquarters for an operation that had been robbing me blind without my consent. I drove aimlessly through Chicago for 40 minutes that night. I drove past the university, past the park I used to go to during my freshman year when I didn't know a soul and needed a bench to do my homework because my dorm room didn't have space for a desk. I drove past the bakery where I bought a plain roll every single morning for 5 years because it was the cheapest calories I could find and because the old man behind the counter would let it slide when I was short on change. I remembered Sophie calling me when I turned 30, telling me she was proud of me, that I was her role model, that she hoped my niece grew up to be just like me. The memories that gut you the most are the ones from before the betrayal, the ones that show you what you thought you had, which you now have to examine under a completely different light. I didn't cry that night. I decided there would be plenty of time for that later. The next day, I went back to the office and worked like nothing happened. Patricia called me every 3rd day with updates. I replied to my family's text messages as if everything was perfectly fine. My mom sent me pictures of the church bake sale. Sophie sent me a video of my niece practicing her Sweet 16 dance. My dad sent me a voice note just saying hello, using that calm voice he gets when he is sitting out on the porch in the late afternoon. I saved every single message, with the date and time, into a folder I named Documentation. 3 weeks in Patricia gave me the panoramic view. We met in her office on a Friday. 2 mugs of black coffee on the table, a slideshow queued up on her laptop. She told me the company had billed $92,000 in 26 months. The tax debt was $11,200 in improperly filed returns. The $45,000 loan was in default, and the lender could trigger the collections clause at any second. The total damage, adding the tax debt, the defaulted loan, and the $35,000 I had handed over directly in the last 6 years surpassed $100,000. She paused. Is there something else? I asked. We found out Rick had placed the company on a list of approved municipal vendors, using my name as the legal proxy. To do that, he needed a document bearing my physical signature. We have a copy of the document he submitted, Patricia said. The signature isn't yours. I asked to see it. She pulled it up on the screen. It was my name, but I didn't write it. It was done by someone who knew what my signature looked like, but had no idea how my hand actually moved when I signed it. Who had access to documents with your real signature? Patricia asked. Sophie. When I helped her sort out her state health insurance for the salon 4 years ago, I gave her copies of my driver's license, my tax ID, and a signed authorization letter. I never asked for the copies back. Patricia scribbled something down. Within 2 weeks, we dropped the hammer. A criminal complaint filed with the state attorney's office for fraud, identity theft, and the unlawful use of legal documents. A civil suit to nullify every single corporate registry made with my data without my consent. Formal complaints filed with the Consumer Protection Bureau and the IRS, establishing a paper trail that I had never authorized any of these filings, and a petition for an emergency injunction to freeze the company's operations and block any collection attempts against me while the investigation played out. Right before I signed the affidavits, I looked at Patricia. I don't want my family to know that I know. Not yet. I want everything filed, sealed, and locked down before any of them hear a single word from me. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses and told me the exact same thing I imagine she tells all her clients when they hit the point of no return. Silence isn't cruelty in a case like this. It is your only tactical advantage. If they find out before these documents are legally shielded, they can move money, they can shred records, they can pressure witnesses. You guard that silence like it is the most valuable asset you own. Because right now, it is. My brain understood it. My brain had understood it the second Chloe sent me that text. It took my stomach a little longer to catch up, but I got there. We knocked out the handwriting analysis in 10 days. Patricia hired a certified forensic document examiner out of the suburbs, a 55-year-old woman who had spent 20 years testifying in civil and commercial courts, and who talked about ink strokes the way a surgeon talks about arteries. We gave her the municipal document with the forged signature, along with 6 real samples of my signature, pulled from bank records, tax filings, and notary books. Her report was bulletproof. My signature has a very specific quirk on the initial M, a muscle memory habit I picked up in high school. It starts from the top, drops diagonally to the left, sweeps up, drops down again, and then the pen lifts before starting the A. The signature on the county document did the exact opposite motion. The pen pressure was wrong. The overall slant was entirely misaligned. Whoever signed that paper didn't even come close to a convincing forgery. The second nail in the coffin was the alibi. The document filed with the county claimed I had appeared in person at the Osgood Department of Public Works on November 8th of last year to validate my proxy status. On November 8th, I was in New York City, attending a continuing education tax seminar hosted by the American Institute of CPAs. I had the hotel receipt from Midtown showing I checked in on the 7th and checked out on the 9th. I had my scanned attendee badge showing my entry time into the lecture hall. I had 4 photographs taken with colleagues in the auditorium lobby, the dates hard-coded into the metadata. I was 800 miles away from Osgood when someone wearing my name walked into that municipal office. Patricia compiled everything into a thick file and dropped it onto her desk with a heavy thud. This is more than enough for the criminal charges, she said. Now we just need the IRS to confirm you are insulated from the debt while the case is active, and we need the judge to grant the injunction before that commercial lender pulls the trigger. The injunction took 16 days. 16 days that felt like a college semester. When Patricia called me with the news, I was auditing a client's ledger in my office. I stepped out into the hallway, shut my door, and listened to her voice with my eyes closed. The IRS officially acknowledged the debt was not directly imputable to me while the fraud investigation was open. The company's operations were legally suspended. The commercial lender had been formally notified that the loan was originated with fraudulent documentation. I hung up the phone and just stood in that hallway for a full minute. The overhead light flickered once. I could hear the city bus groaning down the street. I took a breath, walked back into my office, and went back to the audit. Meanwhile, back in Osgood, the charade played on. My mom kept sending me voice notes about planning my niece Riley's Sweet 16. She told me they booked the hall, that the dress was at the tailor's, that family was driving in from all over the state, and that it would be really nice if I came down on Friday to help set up. I texted back something short and sweet that gave absolutely nothing away. Sophie sent me a link to the Spotify playlist for the party. She asked if I could swing by the teen department at the mall to see if I could pick up a specific gift. I told her I already had it handled. And Rick, my brother-in-law, during this exact same window, he sent me a text message I had to read 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. He told me he had a massive business opportunity with a custom metalwork supplier up in Chicago. He said he could handle the sales side, and if I just put up 10 grand in seed money, we could double our investment in 2 months. He promised he had the math completely dialed in this time. I read that text standing up in my apartment kitchen, my coffee still steaming in the mug. My brother-in-law was asking me for $10,000, while he was currently sitting on a fraudulent $45,000 loan taken out under my stolen identity. The sheer audacity of some human beings operates on a scale you can't even measure. I texted him back, saying cash flow was tight right now, but we would see. He didn't ask again. In September, 3 weeks before the Sweet 16, Patricia called me in for the final strategy meeting. We sat in front of her laptop, and she laid out the endgame. Everything was locked in. The criminal complaint was active. The IRS had frozen the entity. The loan was paralyzed. The forged documents were legally dismantled by the forensic report. "When do you want the subpoena served?" she asked. I asked her if they could be served on the night of the Sweet 16. The room went quiet. Then she asked me if I was absolutely sure. I told her that for 6 years I had handed over my money in the dark. I had swallowed their comments about being materialistic. I had answered their panic-laced phone calls and said nothing. I had functioned as their personal emergency fund without a title, without a thank you. Every dollar I gave in silence. Every disappointment I choked down in silence. I wanted the truth to have the exact same stage presence their lies had always enjoyed. Not in front of the whole town, just in front of the family who either knew exactly what was happening or had actively chosen not to ask. Patricia understood. She asked for the address of the banquet hall. I gave it to her. I told her the place was called the Heritage Room, right off the state highway. The party officially started at 8, and the immediate family would be gathered there well before the doors opened. She told me one last thing. Serving subpoenas is going to alter the gravity of that room forever. Have you really thought this through? I told her the room was tainted long before I ever walked into it. The day of the party, I drove out of Chicago at 5 in the afternoon. The highway cutting down into Indiana has this bruised orange light at that hour that makes everything look a lot more dramatic than it actually is. I drove with the windows rolled up and the music turned low, just some instrumental track that didn't demand any emotional bandwidth. Sitting on the passenger seat was the thick manila envelope Patricia had given me. Certified copies of everything. The fraudulent articles of incorporation, the handwriting analysis, the IRS records, the defaulted loan statements, the judge's injunction. I rolled into Osgood at 7:30. I didn't go straight to the hall. I drove slowly down my parents' street. The house had lights on. A few lawn chairs were set out front. The older folks who can't handle the bass at the banquet hall usually just stay back at the house. I kept driving. I pulled into the parking lot of the Heritage Room at 8:10. Even from the car, I could hear the music thumping. There were license plates from 3 different counties. I spotted Rick's truck parked right up front in a VIP spot. The exact same truck he bought using a chunk of that fraudulent loan, according to the paper trail Patricia pulled. I sat in my car for 10 minutes. I checked my phone. Patricia had texted me. Process server confirms he is in position. Give the word and he moves in 15. I texted back. Ready. Send him in. I put my phone away. I grabbed the envelope off the passenger seat. I held it for a second, just staring up at the roof of my car. I thought about Sophie, when we were 12, teaching me how to French braid my hair because her fingers always figured it out faster than mine. I thought about her crying her eyes out when her first boyfriend dumped her, and how I sat on the floor of her bedroom for 4 hours without saying anything important, just being there. I thought about the last Christmas the 4 of us siblings spent together 5 years ago, playing cards at my mom's kitchen table until 1 in the morning. Good memories don't erase the betrayal that comes later. They just give the grief a sharper name. I grabbed the envelope, stepped out of the car, and walked through the front doors of the hall. The party was hitting that chaotic, high-volume peak of early arrivals. The DJ was pumping a beat that rattled the floorboards. Kids were sprinting between the catering tables. The older relatives were shouting over the speakers just to hear each other. The rotating colored lights made the whole room look like a cheap fever dream. I saw my mom before she saw me. She was sitting at the head table with my dad, my Aunt Rose, and 2 of Rick's cousins who only show up for the free booze. She looked elegant. She was wearing the dress she saves for weddings and funerals, her hair perfectly set. She looked genuinely happy. I saw Sophie standing dead center in the room, talking to 3 women at once, pointing toward the dance floor, throwing her head back in laughter. She was wearing a stunning burgundy dress. She was completely in her element. I saw Rick leaning against the bar, with 3 of his buddies nursing a drink, standing like a man who has the world on a string. And I saw my niece Riley, standing there in her pink dress and her tiara, utterly oblivious to the storm radiating, that pure, clean kind of happiness that had absolutely nothing to do with the filth swirling around her. I stopped. I took a breath. 3 sharp knocks on the side door of the hall. The process server and his assistant. I watched the security guy let them in. I watched them cut straight across the floor, their eyes scanning the room for the faces matching the photos in their files. I saw the exact moment Rick spotted them. I watched the color drain completely out of his face. The process server read the subpoena. He used that flat, mechanical voice of a guy who does this 5 times a day. No theatrics, no apologies, just the heavy machinery of the law. Richard Thomas Bowman and Sophia Sullivan Bowman. You are hereby served and commanded to appear before the State Attorney's Office Financial Crimes Division on the 22nd of this month to provide sworn testimony regarding an active criminal investigation for corporate fraud, identity theft, unlawful use of legal documents, and money laundering. The music kept pounding for about 5 more seconds. Then somebody killed the feed. The silence that rushed in wasn't just an absence of noise. It was the sound of a reality shattering in real time, the pieces still suspended in the air before hitting the floor. That is when I walked over to the head table. My mom saw me approaching. Her face morphed from shock to a reflex smile and right back to shock when she read the absolute 0 in my eyes. She knew this wasn't a standard grand entrance. I stood right in front of the table. I spoke using the voice I had been unknowingly calibrating for the last 6 months. I didn't yell, my pitch didn't shake. It was the exact voice I use when I am breaking down a catastrophic audit for a corporate client. Clear, surgical, leaving zero room for interpretation. I told them that 6 months ago I discovered a business operating under my identity, completely without my knowledge. I told them that company had billed nearly $100,000 in 2 years, that there was an active tax lien filed against my name for money I never touched, that there was a $45,000 commercial loan taken out using forged documents bearing my signature. I told them that every single piece of it was documented, legally contested, and sitting inside a criminal docket. And I told them that what they just received was merely the opening move in a legal war that was going to proceed with or without the cooperation of anyone standing in this room. I opened the envelope. I dropped the stack of certified documents right in the middle of the table, somewhere between the floral centerpiece and the breadbasket. Sophie was the first one to break. She didn't offer a defense. She went straight for the tears. The kind of crying designed to extract pity before the brain demands logic. She sobbed that things had been so hard, that Rick couldn't catch a break, that the kids needed things, that she knew it was wrong, but she couldn't see any other way out. She swore she was going to pay me back every dime. I let her finish. Then I reached into the pile, pulled out the municipal vendor registration, tapped my finger on the forged signature, and asked her at what exact moment, during her financial hardship, she decided to forge my name to defraud a government office. I asked her if that was also an act of desperation, or if that was just a cold, calculated hustle. She didn't answer. Her tears stopped instantly. That sudden, dry silence was the most honest thing she had offered me in 6 years. Rick tried to play his hand. He puffed his chest and said I made great money, that I had a booming firm in the city, that 45 grand didn't mean the same thing to me as it did to them, that I had forgotten what it was like to barely scrape by. I looked dead at him and told him he was right about one thing. I hadn't known what it was like to scrape by for the last 6 years because my own flesh and blood had been bleeding me dry without my permission. I told him that wasn't a difference in perspective. I told him it was a felony. My dad just sat there. He didn't say a word. He looked physically diminished. Not shorter, he was the same man, but something structural inside him had given way. Like a building that loses a load-bearing beam, the facade is still standing, but the house is condemned. My mom started shaking her head. She said she couldn't understand how it had come to this, that we were sisters, that family does not destroy each other over money. I asked her the only question that actually mattered. Did you know Sophie was running a business out of your house under my name? She sat there in silence for entirely too long, before she finally shook her head no. That hesitation told me everything I ever needed to know. Aunt Rose, my mom's sister, who had spent the last 20 years watching our family's toxic dynamic play out from the sidelines, finally stood up. She grabbed her purse. She looked down at my mom, and in a voice that was quiet but hit like a hammer, she said, "This isn't right. What they did to your daughter doesn't have a pretty name." Then she walked around the table, stopped in front of me, put a hand firmly on my shoulder, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You did exactly what you had to do." She walked out of the hall without looking back. I gathered my documents off the table. I left exactly one piece of paper behind the prosecutor's summons with their court date and time. Before I walked out, I stopped for a second in front of my niece Riley. She was standing frozen by the edge of the dance floor. She didn't fully grasp the legal mechanics of what had just happened, but she had the wide, terrified eyes of a kid who knows the floor just fell out from under her life. I pulled her into a hug. I whispered in her ear that this was still her night, that nothing that just happened had anything to do with her. She nodded with that heavy, solemn maturity that 16-year-olds sometimes have. A maturity that puts most adults to shame. I walked out of the hall. I walked down the 3 concrete steps into the parking lot. An October night in Indiana carries a dry, biting cold that drops fast the second the sun goes down. The balloon arches tied to the handrails were violently whipping in the wind. I got into my car. I turned the ignition. I drove out of that parking lot, and I never once checked my rearview mirror. Halfway back to Chicago, I pulled over at a gas station right off the interstate. I bought a black coffee in a styrofoam cup and sat on a cheap plastic bench right by the ice machine. The semi-trucks were roaring past on the highway, their headlights slicing through the dark. The sky was crystal clear, packed with stars you can't ever see in Chicago because the city glow drowns them out. I sat there for 15 minutes, just letting the heat from the cup warm my hands. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel destroyed. For the first time in a very long time, I just felt exactly my own size. The months that followed moved with the slow, grinding rhythm of the justice system. Methodical, cold, zero room for sentimentality. Patricia called me with the milestones. The state formally indicted Sophie and Rick in November. Rick showed up to the arraignment with a hotshot private defense attorney who promptly withdrew from the case the second he saw the mountain of forensic evidence we handed over. Sophie showed up with my dad. He sat out in the hallway on a wooden bench, his hands locked together over his knees, staring at the floor, not speaking to anyone. The IRS permanently dissolved the fraudulent LLC. The tax liability was firmly pinned to the corporate entity, completely severing me from the debt. Once the identity theft was legally established, the commercial lender launched their own aggressive recovery suit directly against Rick. His truck was repossessed before Thanksgiving. My dad avoided criminal charges. He had let them use his mailbox without asking the right questions, which landed him in a legal gray area that the prosecutor decided wasn't worth pursuing. But it went into the official court record. He was an unwitting facilitator. His public defender argued he was an elderly man with zero criminal history who hadn't seen a dime of the stolen money. The judge either believed him or just decided to take pity on him. I'm still not sure which version is the truth. Sophie cut a plea deal with the DA. 500 hours of community service, a structured restitution plan that Patricia monitors like a hawk, and mandatory monthly check-ins with a probation officer. Rick caught 3 years of supervised probation with severe travel restrictions. That phantom metalwork business in Chicago never existed. My mom stayed down in Osgood. She calls me about every 3 weeks from a cell number I sometimes recognize and sometimes don't. I read the first few text messages. They said exactly what I knew they were going to say. That she loved me, that I was her daughter, that nothing that happened could ever change that. After a certain point, I stopped opening them. It's not out of cruelty, it's out of self-preservation. Some conversations don't lead anywhere useful, and learning to walk away from the table is a survival skill nobody teaches you. You just have to learn it the hard way. Aunt Rose texts me every couple of weeks. She tells me about her life in the city, her knitting club, her garden. Sometimes she mentions my mom, but she never pressures me. She never asks me to call home. She never tries to play the peacemaker. She just lets me know she is okay, and then she changes the subject. I appreciate that more than she probably realizes. There are people who show up during the darkest chapters of your life, and they just stand there with you. They don't demand anything in return. That is what you are left with when the smoke clears. In February, I started going to therapy. Not because I was falling apart, I was functioning perfectly. I was running my firm, crushing audits, paying my bills, sleeping 8 hours a night. But I needed to figure out something that no legal brief was ever going to explain. How did I let myself become the unacknowledged ATM for an entire family for 6 years without ever drawing a line in the sand? And why, during all that time, when my gut was screaming at me that something was deeply wrong, did I keep putting the calculator away every time they guilt tripped me? My therapist dropped a line on me during our third session that kept me awake for a week. She told me that boundaries aren't brick walls you build to keep people out. They are the perimeter you establish to understand where you end and where other people begin. And when you are raised in a family where love and financial obligation are violently tangled together, you end up confusing generosity with your fundamental identity. You start believing that if you stop bleeding for them, you stop belonging to them. It took me 38 years to figure that out. I don't think it's too late. I think it is the exact moment I was finally ready to hear it. I have a list written on a yellow Post-it note stuck to the monitor in my office. It says, I do not lend money without a contract. If I want to give, I give it as a gift on my terms, not when someone manufactures an emergency. I do not sign my name to a single page I haven't read twice. I do not carry other people's emotional debts like they belong to me. They aren't the rules of a cold-hearted person. They are the rules I should have drafted when I was 29, and that I finally forced myself to learn at 38. Last month, I had to drive down near Osgood for work. Picked up a new client who runs a mid-sized furniture manufacturing plant out that way. I drove down the street I grew up on without planning to. The GPS just routed me that way. My parents' house looked exactly the same. The same terracotta pots on the porch that my mom has watered since I was a little kid. An orange stray cat was asleep on the top step, soaking up the afternoon sun. I didn't hit the brakes. I just eased off the gas, looked at the house for 3 seconds, and kept driving. In Chicago, I have a basil plant sitting on my kitchen windowsill. I bought it at the French market on a freezing Sunday in January. It sprouted fresh leaves this week. Small, bright green, pushing straight up toward the glass, right where the sun hits. I looked at it this morning while my coffee was brewing, and I just stared at it for a minute, for no particular reason. My name is Mary Sullivan. I am 38 years old, I am a CPA, and this is the story of how I learned that taking care of your family doesn't mean letting them use you as the foundation for their lies. That being generous is not the same thing as being limitlessly available, and that sometimes getting back what belongs to you starts by realizing it was always yours to begin with, and nobody ever had the right to leverage it without asking. Everything they built behind my back was torn down. Every signature they faked was exposed. Everything they thought they could bury in the dark was dragged out into the light the second someone who actually reads the fine print started digging. That signature they tried to trace never belonged to them. And that door I pushed open at the Sweet 16 wasn't meant to destroy anything. I opened it so I could finally drop a weight I was never supposed to carry. If you saw a piece of yourself in this story, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you are watching from and which part of this hit closest to home. You are not crazy, and you are not alone. This kind of financial abuse happens a lot more than people want to admit, and dragging it out into the open is the first step to stopping it. Taking care of the people you love is a beautiful thing, but there is a massive difference between giving from the heart and letting someone pick your pocket while they hug you. Mary didn't just win back her clean tax record, she won back the absolute certainty of knowing who she is and exactly what her peace of mind is worth. Sometimes, the hardest boundary you set doesn't push the good people away, it actually brings them closer. And at the end of the day, that is all you really have left. One important note: this story was conceptualized and written by artificial intelligence with the goal of entertaining while also dropping a truth that might just help someone out there in the real world.